I don't have a particularly big following on this channel. I don't expect this video to really do anything, and the purpose isn't, woe is me and to garner sympathy. The point of this video is to raise awareness for specifically men's mental health, but overall mental health in general, and also just share my completely abysmal experience with the NHS. Just so you get a concept of time here, I was born in 1991, and my generation, we weren't really taught about mental health. It wasn't really spoken about. Me in particular grew up with parents who shunned at the idea, and I was kind of shoved to one side and ignored whenever I tried to express feelings of anxiety or feeling low. It started with bullying. I'm not really going to go into that, but my point is, didn't really understand depression or what I was going through or what I was feeling. And I feel overall society, at least in my generation, didn't talk about mental health until Robin Williams died. It took a celebrity to take his own life for anyone to take it seriously. But by that point, I was already 23. I had friends who suffered bipolar disorder and similar mental health issues, and I always heard people talking about going to their GP, go to their doctor and get help. I didn't really know much about it, so if I'm honest, I thought that antidepressants were essentially placebos. It was around this time where me and my wife at the time actually separated, which led to a huge slump of depression. So at this point, I decided, right, I need to get help. So I went to my doctor and I got prescribed some antidepressants. And one thing that I was always told is that they need time to kick in. And people kept changing the time frame. They said, I'll give them 4 weeks. Oh, you have to give them 6 weeks. You have to give them 8 weeks. You have to give them 3 months. I was on antidepressants for 2 years, with my doctor increasing the dosage to 200 milligrams, which is a very high dosage for an antidepressant. I was essentially a lab rat. They were putting me on different antidepressants, the strongest antidepressants. I was on citalopram, fluoxetine, sertraline. I was put on all of these, and the whole time I was on them, other than, the obvious side effects of nausea, lightheadedness and all this stuff, nothing seemed to actually help me. I was then given one singular counselling session, and if I'm completely honest, it made me feel worse than when I went in. I told this guy what I was going through and how I was feeling, and his methods were essentially boiled down to, don't feel it. He gave me homework, like mental exercises to do at home, which again, if I'm being honest, made me feel worse. They were exercises in which it was a table to fill out when I'm feeling low. You start it by telling how you feel, and then as you go along, you detail why you're feeling like this. Then you needed to find evidence to back up this feeling, and theoretically by the end of it, you're supposed to feel better because you've looked at the evidence and kind of debunked your own thoughts. The issue is, anyone who deals with mental health knows that the more you think about something, the more you overthink about something, and then the thoughts get worse. So by the end of it, because I'm looking for the evidence, I'm looking at the stuff that's making me feel this way, I felt even worse. So it was a completely pointless exercise. Eventually, after 2 years of being on these antidepressants, my doctor, who I can't fault, he was really nice and really supportive. He was great, but he took me off them. He said it was pointless. They clearly weren't helping me. So he took me off them and nothing else was said. So I was left to fend for myself. I forget the year exactly. I want to say maybe 2018, 2019. I would have been 27, 28. I was going through a rough patch and I thought, okay, I need help. So I went back to my doctor The same guy, really nice, and he put me on some antidepressants. Again, just to try them again, which I was all for. However, once they ran out and I needed to go back for a checkup, the original doctor had retired. And he was replaced with another man who had actually received a lot of complaints for his lack of empathy, lack of professionalism, and lack of seemingly education in the role that he was working in. I sat in this room with this doctor and I was really distraught, and I asked to be signed off from work for just a few weeks to get my head straight. He then snapped at me and said, "Oh, you've asked this before already." And bear in mind, I had never met this doctor before in my life, and I had never asked for time off work before. He then went through his records, or my records, to realise that he was wrong. So he just judged me for someone who randomly asks for time off work for no reason. For no reason. He reluctantly gave me time off. And when those 2 weeks expired, I went back for another checkup, and I was still struggling. So I said, "Look, I'm really sorry. I need more time." He told me to my face that my depression wasn't real. He refused to give me time off work, and he said the antidepressants clearly weren't doing anything. It was all in my head, and I quote, "It's just life." Now, I'm not a very confrontational person, but I felt desperate at this point, so I did call him out on this. And I said, well, no, there's a difference between feeling sad and having depression. There's a difference between feeling depressed and having depression. You know, feeling depressed is happenstance. If you lose your job or your partner cheats on you, you know, you lose some money, you're going to feel depressed. But depression is a chemical imbalance inside your brain where you wake up and you hate yourself and there's no actual trigger for it. I felt baffled that I had to explain this to a professional, apparently qualified doctor. And he just said, no, that's just life. I go through that every day. I walked out of that GP and I've never gone back since. Again, I was left on my own. I didn't know what to do when my own doctor is telling me it's in my head. Where do you go from there? It wasn't until 2020. So at this point, I am 29 years old. Some stuff came out about my parents, particularly my mother, where I'm just going to be blunt. She abused my brother, some of which I was actually a witness to, but I was at quite a young age. Some of it I remember. Others were more repressed memories, but upon finding this out, it brought some of them back. And, you know, going from a woman who I grew up loving and defending, and then to find out these horrible truths, and it kind of brought me reliving my child, like every memory of my childhood, I was now calling into question. And I was racing through my memories to incidents that I do recall. And I'm like, oh, wait, was this that? Or do I remember this? It was very, very heavy on my mental state. So I thought I need to talk to someone about this. So I contacted a few, therapy places. I wish I could remember the names of the first few, but they quoted a price. I personally do not understand why therapy costs money. There's certain things in life that should be free. I don't understand why therapy costs money. You're depressed and you want to end your own life. Well, we can fix it if you give us money. It does not make any sense to me. With these people, I told them what I was going through, and I said, this is why the male suicide rate is so high in the country, because suicide is just cheaper and easier. They replied to that email saying, well, we can give you a discount. And I again replied about my suicidal thoughts, and they never actually responded. I was then recommended the cognitive behavioral therapy called Changing Minds, and these have had a lot of good reviews. So at this point, I reached out to CBT. They offered me a phone call to talk about what I was going through. This was a confidential line, and I spoke to a woman for 45 minutes about everything I've just told you, about the abuse my brother went through. I should also mention that there were things that was done to me, but not physically, as a child, that I kind of accepted as normal because I was a child. But now I'm an adult and now I'm a father. I look back and I realise, wait, that wasn't acceptable. That was actually a form of abuse. And without trying to point the blame, I feel like could actually be responsible for certain issues that I suffer today. I expressed all of this in this 45-minute phone call. The abuse my brother went through, the stuff I went through, the stuff I witnessed, the stuff I nearly witnessed. And the woman on the phone was really nice and listened to everything. And she was like, okay, leave that with me. Give us a couple days. We're going to come back and give you an update of what therapy we're going to put you forward for. So bear in mind, I've just poured my heart out about childhood abuse that me and my brother went through at the hands of my mother. They come back to me and offer me therapy for social anxiety. They also sent me leaflets. They sent me leaflets to deal with depression, and I'm not joking. If you read through it, it says, you're having these thoughts, don't. Why didn't I think of that? There was no actual techniques. That it was boiled down to don't have these thoughts. Like it was the simplest thing in the world. At this point, I told them, I've just told you that we were abused as children and you've ignored me completely and put me forward for social anxiety. They then offered me another phone call for another 45-minute phone call to discuss what I need. And I said, no. Well, I just spent 45 minutes talking to you about these thoughts I was having, the abuse that we went through, more specifically my brother because it was physical, and you've put me forward for something completely different. They never even replied to that email, so that was another dead end. One thing I hate is people pretending that they understand mental health, but they clearly don't. And I'm going to be honest, there's been times in my life where I haven't been there for people regarding their mental health. And to those people, I apologise from the bottom of my heart. It is my biggest regret. I'm sorry. I should have been there. I wasn't. And I was a hypocrite. I've had girls. I was talking to a girl once who literally refused to go out with me. We had a date planned. She refused to go out with me because she saw me cry in a video. Why don't men speak out about their mental health? Do you know that 78% of suicides in the UK in 2019 was men? And oddly enough, I think that same year, 19% of women suffered from depression, whereas it was only 14% of men. So women suffer depression more, but men kill themselves more. Now, there's probably two reasons for that. Either one, women get more support, or two, men actually do suffer depression more, but that 14% is only lower because men are too scared to go to the doctor to get diagnosed because of this very reaction. There was a girl I liked who literally said she couldn't be with me because I brought her down all the time because of my depression. She needed someone to lift her spirits. And this was a woman who suffered depression. I grew up with someone and knew them, female, since I was 3 or 4. And when I confided in them in 2021 that I attempted or was considering killing myself, she said she wouldn't stop me. This was the same friend who weeks prior I went to and said I was struggling finding out this stuff about my mother. And she shrugged and said, why does it bother you? I don't understand how someone can be so careless when a person is saying they want to kill themselves, let alone someone who you considered a best friend and you've known nearly 30 years. I can't fathom that. To dismiss someone having these thoughts, I don't care if you know them or not. If a random subscriber emailed me and said that they were feeling like killing themselves, it would break my heart and I would talk to them. Eventually, I decided I need this help. In early 2022, I went through a rough period where I didn't actually work for about 3 months because I was just bedridden with depression. I couldn't function. I couldn't do anything. So I decided to go to a different doctor's that my partner was at. And they appointed me a mental health specialist. I went in and my anxiety was so bad I couldn't go anywhere on my own at this point. So my partner and daughter came with me. I went to see this mental health specialist. She took down my details and I confided in her and said, look, my last GP said this. She was mortified that my last doctor told me my depression was real. I told her I was having suicidal thoughts. She recommended Changing Minds, the CBT, the behavioural therapy that I tried before. The 45-minute phone call, she recommended them. And then I said, I tried them, but I didn't have any luck. And she goes, well, try them again. How do you get paid to listen to people and be this bad at it? She assured me that I'd have better luck with her. So, guess what? She put me on antidepressants, which was fine. I was like, okay, I'll give them a go. She was going to call me every 2 weeks to check on me. Do you know how many times that happened? Once. She called me the first time, and guess what? The phone call was about 30 seconds. When I met with her in person, she gave me a couple weeks off work. And then she called me up 2 weeks later to check on me. She was like, how are you doing? And I just said, well, I'm really, really struggling. And she goes, okay, I'll sign you off for 2 more weeks. That was the phone call. That was the phone call. There was no actual conversation. There was no further steps. There was no consideration. Nothing. But I'm like, okay, well, I guess at least she called me. 2 more weeks go by. And she calls me, but I'm driving, so I missed the call. I call her straight back. I pull up the car, I call her back, and it goes through to the receptionist. The receptionist says, I'm really sorry, I can't transfer you over directly, but I can pass on the message and she'll call you back. And guess what? I never get a call back. I run out of medication, so again, I call the doctor for a new dose, get the receptionist, I'm sorry, I can't transfer you over, I'll pass on the message and you'll get a call back. I never do. This is a woman that I confided in and said I'm having suicidal thoughts. My last doctor gave up on me. And after one phone call, she has abandoned me. I could have killed myself and she would be none the wiser. It's a miracle that I'm still here. The only, and I mean it, the only reason I am still alive at this point is because I am lucky enough to have my fiancée. If I wasn't with her, I'd be dead. I'm just going to say that right now. I would be under the ground because there's been no support from the NHS whatsoever. I don't know how many times I have to say the word suicide before anyone takes it seriously. And I guarantee if I threw my body in front of a train tomorrow, be on the news, and people be like, I had no idea. And the NHS would put out a campaign to raise awareness for mental health. And it's all bullshit. Because this is the experience that I've had for over a decade. I don't hear anything from her. I start a new job. It did lift my spirits, this new job. And I gained a close friend. Guess what? Female. She had a lot of similar mental health issues. So she told me about this online therapy called SilverCloud. And it's basically an online journal. You can input your thoughts. It's all virtual. And an actual person will frequently check up on you. And I thought, well, that sounds great for me. I don't have to go anywhere. It's all virtual. I can type it. So I typed in an entry, really graphic, because I was feeling miserable, how depressed I was, how I wanted to end my life. And they replied, and it said it was an actual person, but it was a copy and paste. And it said, I can see you've made great progress. I will see you at the end of the month for our next review. I angrily replied and said, I've just told you I want to kill myself. And you've just done that. How many times does someone have to threaten suicide for someone to actually wake up and do something? I was left on my own. Because what's the point anymore? Didn't go back to my doctors because, well, they clearly don't care. It wasn't until March 2023 I decided to just leave the surgery a review. I'll just be honest. One of the managers did reply, said, can you call me on this number? At this point, right, first of all, you've got my details. If this is an urgent issue that you really care about someone about, call them. I'm not calling you. Why would I when none of you have listened? And then a couple weeks ago, something happened. I put a vague post out, and I'm going to be vague here as well. ish. Someone that I was very, very close friends with since I was about 3 or 4 was arrested, and they are currently serving 16 years in prison for grooming and raping an underage girl. This is a person who I trusted. He babysat my children, was in several videos, which is why they're being re-edited, and someone who I had no idea was capable of this. So the past 3 years have been hell, if I'm honest, because you've got the stuff with my parents and realising a lot of my childhood is now called into question, and it seems like that was a lie. Then we've got the female friend who I knew since I was small, and their stance on mental health, but then they go and share posts raising mental health awareness, but they don't preach it privately. They just share it publicly, but then disregard it if it's not their own. So now anytime I think of them, I have negative thoughts because of how they treated me and my mental health. And then you've got this guy who I've also known since I was a kid. And any time I think of him now, I can't help but think of what he's done to that girl. To me, as dramatic as it sounds, it seems like my whole life has been a lie. I don't know what to do, if I'm completely honest. People have said, try another GP. What? Third time's the charm. I was recommended the charity Mind, raises mental health awareness. Great charity. I've raised money for them in some of the marathons that I've run. They have a crisis cafe. They have several across the country where you can go in, confide in someone, get advice. They're affiliated with the NHS so they can refer you. Finding this out about my close friend, it was... I can't even explain it. It's probably the worst thing I've had to go through ever. I thought, fuck it. There's no alternative at this point. I go to this crisis cafe and I speak to this woman. I repeat everything I've just said to you, but in a bit more vague terms, not as detailed. She was great, really listened to me, and she said she's going to refer me. She asked what my resolution was, what I wanted, and I said, well, look, I clearly need therapy. I think we're all in agreement I need therapy. The past 3 years, like, she was mortified about my experience with the NHS, and she's in complete agreement with me. And having this much, essentially, trauma in 3 years, it's revelation, like... Can the 2020s chill out, please? I can't take much more. She said that they can refer me for therapy. But guess what? It comes with a charge. I don't think you understand. I've spent a lot of this year unemployed. The cost of living's going up. I can't fucking afford you to help me not tie a noose around my neck. Like, it shouldn't be that deep. Like, it should just fucking help me. At that point, I emailed my surgery directly. Instead of leaving a shitty review, I emailed them an essay. And again, I detailed everything that I've said to you, my whole experience with the NHS, and I listed the crisis cafe. And then I'm at work, and I get a call. And I step out to take this call. And it's from the mental health specialist. You know, the one that abandoned me a year and a half ago. Do you remember her? A lovely gal. No explanation. Literally, she goes, so... I've heard you've been struggling to call me. Yeah, fucking 18 months ago! Where have you been? Did you run out to the store to get milk? Was there a long queue? I'm sorry, I'm only here trying not to die. Like, despite having a fiancé, I've still had those thoughts. I've still considered getting in the car and driving off a bridge. I just want help. It shouldn't... Not only does she not acknowledge the fact that it's been a year and a half, Not only does she not apologise, she was also so casual. She was so blasé about this phone call. She just offers me more antidepressants. And that's it. Goes, it's at your local pharmacy. And that was the phone call. No further words. Everything else in my email, completely ignored. When I got out of work, I realised that the surgery actually replied to my email before she had called, but I didn't realise because I was at work. So I read this email, and it blamed me! This email said, we're so sorry for your experience, blah, blah, blah. Mental health specialist going to call you later, blah, 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 blah. She said, also, next time, please don't leave it. We want to help. Please don't leave it? What do you mean? I went back because I was raging and I said, I didn't leave it. Your mental health specialist was supposed to call back a manic depressive who wanted to kill himself to check on him. She made that agreement. She didn't do it. They didn't reply to this email. I was told to contact my PALS, the liaison services that are above the NHS. So I contacted them. They said, no, we can't help. Raise it with this complaint line, complaint services or something. So I contacted them. At the time of recording this, they did actually reply and they've asked for me to fill out a form. So I'm going to do that straight after this video. But the surgery themselves haven't acknowledged it. Because why would they? I'm alive. They're not going to do shit until I'm dead. This is the reality. No one gives a fuck until there's a suicide. Chester Bennington had literally told his band members that he wanted to kill himself. They didn't take him seriously, and he killed himself. Kurt Cobain had several suicide attempts beforehand, and then he was sent to rehab, and guess what? The rehab didn't keep an eye on him, and he killed himself. Obviously, during COVID, everyone was like, applaud the NHS. And it brought a bad taste in my mouth, because I'm like, look, what you've done for COVID is great. But NHS isn't this spectacular service, because you can only say they're understaffed so much. A simple phone call, a simple therapy session for someone who's been struggling, at least in their books, for what, at least 10 years? But realistically, I've suffered with my first suicide attempt was when I was 13, which is now my son's age. It's great that schools are now teaching mental health, but what good is it when the doctors themselves don't give a shit? This is the reality of the NHS dealing with mental health. My female friend who was on Silver Cloud, she said she's had a great experience. They've been great with her. I've got a friend who went for that CBT therapy. I know that's redundant because the T in CBT stands for therapy, but shut up. She's had a great experience with the therapy. So why is no one listening to me? I don't get it. If you have testicles, then apparently it doesn't matter. If anyone else is going through this, no, you're not alone. And hopefully you have someone like I do to pull you through it, because quite frankly, if I'm completely honest, the government and the doctors do not and probably will never give a fuck.